Amen. Good morning, everybody. You can take a seat. I hope that all of you had a week that was less fun than mine. We started out at the Howard House with Jenny getting strep throat, and that merged right into our 8-year-old son, Jimmy, snapping his humerus in half while attempting some sort of Gabby Douglas move at the park that did not work. It was awesome, and coming off of a crazy week and that experience, I have some advice for all of you, and that is if your back has been feeling really good lately, if you haven't had any trouble rolling out of bed or standing or walking, just spend a night on one of those hospital couches, and that'll fix it right up. It was an eventful week at the Howard House, and it's an eventful week at Revision because we're starting a brand new series. But before we jump in, I got a little bit of a disclaimer. There's this moment in John chapter 6 where Jesus stands up in front of a big old crowd and he gives his worst sermon ever. Like, it happens, we all do. It's part of public speaking. When you're coming up with thousands of new words a week, sometimes you get up and you give a clunker and people just don't come back. And that's this one for Jesus, and his disciples, as they heard it, were really worried because they thought it wasn't on purpose. And John writes, he says, man, things were going really well, everything is great, and this is the day we lost the crowd. Like, Jesus stood up and he said what he said, and they all bailed. They were like, hey, we love the free food, appreciate the miracles, but what you just said, it's a little crazy for us. We're out. And John writes that they walked away. I've been praying and thinking and reading and studying for this series for months now. But it struck me this week as I was preparing this message that this could be my John 6 moment. Like, hey, Mike, we love the music. Kids programming is great. Revive, so awesome. That Happily Even After series was super helpful, but this is a step too far. It's offensive. It's uncomfortable. We're out. So at the risk of all of you never coming back again, we're just going to dive right into this series called This Is Us. And I think that title begs a couple questions. Specifically, who is us and what is this? Well, us is us, you and me, Revision Church. And more broadly, it's the followers of Jesus in the world. Pretty simple. So if us is us and this is us, what is this? Well, this is something we all like to think we are, but a whole lot of the time we're really not. This is something everyone could be, and if we were, it would change our lives and change our world. This opens doors and solves problems and inspires others to join in. It's contagious. This is something that doesn't come easy and doesn't come naturally to us, but God says we are hardwired for this. And when we live this, we unleash the full potential he's given us, individually and collectively. This is who God is, and it's how God moves in the world, and this is part of being who we were made to be. This is generosity. We're going to spend some time over the next few weeks looking at what the Bible has to say about living generously with our time and our love and our finances and our lives. And we're going to hopefully let the Bible give us a brand new lens that, frankly, a lot of us think we already have but don't. And we're going to hopefully let the Bible teach us a brand new way of being in the world that, statistically speaking, most Americans think they already are but aren't. And that's where the offense comes in. Because it's a little bit insulting and it's a little bit uncomfortable to be told that we aren't as amazing as we think we are, that we aren't quite as wonderful and perfect and benevolent as we've let ourselves believe that we are, that we've settled for something less than God's best vision for our lives, and we've lived a little bit more selfishly than we like to admit. We just don't like to hear that. And that doesn't mean that everyone in this room is like an awful, terrible, self-absorbed, rotten weasel. Okay, don't hear me saying that. It's not true. That's not the point. There's some awesome people in this room. And if you're here for the first time and you've already decided you're offended and you're never coming back, you should anyway, because these people are awesome. You'll like it if you hang around them. But the reality is, living generously is a struggle for most of us in the midst of a wildly materialistic, self-centered culture. It is. But if you're anything like me, your first thought whenever someone says you're not something is to like immediately recall one time when you did something that was something. You did that thing. Like if someone says you're not a certain way, the first thing that you want to do in your mind is recall a time when you did something that was that way. Like for instance, guys in this room, let's have a real, raw, honest moment. When your wife says, you don't help out enough around the house, what's your reaction? I know what your reaction is. It's to incredulously ask, oh, so now we're forgetting? We're not counting that time last year when I fixed both the washer and the dryer? I guess that wasn't helpful around the house. This is what we do. It's this natural human reaction to say, like, not me, not me. I did this, I did that. So as soon as I talk about generosity, something inside of us, and I know that there's that something inside of us because it's alive and well in me, something inside of us says, oh, not me. I did this, I did that, I gave this, I gave that. But there's something we got to understand right off the bat. Giving and being generous are two different things. I'm going to say it again because I think it's critically important that we get this. Giving your time or your money and being generous, living a lifestyle of sacrifice for the sake of the needs of the people around you are two different things. One is something that we do occasionally and randomly, and the other is something we are. It's a foundational way of thinking and moving in the world. And what we're going to talk about over the course of this series isn't so much a to-do list. I don't want to give you a bunch of boxes to check or a list of things that you need to do. I want to talk about this picture God is painting for who he created us to be. I want to invite us into it. Invite us to be generous people who live and look more like Jesus, because it matters if we're living and looking like Jesus in the world. It does. And why does it matter? Why spend time talking about this? Because I think it is so easy for us to miss out. It's so easy for us to settle for the stuff the world tells us we ought to be chasing, and then chase it and then wonder why we're dissatisfied and we're empty. It's so easy to buy into the lies that we're told and chase this materialistic vision our culture gives us, believing that if we actually live the way God says he created us to live in the world, at the end of the day, there won't be enough left over for us. It's so easy to let the gifts God has given us for the sake of blessing the people around us just atrophy, because we're so busy navel-gazing, we can't even see the places all around us where God is inviting us to use them. And it's so easy to let the dreams God has placed inside us for how we can change the world just shrivel up and die inside our souls, because we're so busy chasing the American dream that we don't have time for them. It's so easy. I know that it is. I know it. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately, just because of my own human selfish tendencies, about how I only got one life to live. I got one shot at this thing. That's it. And it's fleeting and it's fragile, and tomorrow could be my last day breathing. So if I only have one shot, I want to spend it on something that's bigger than myself. I want to spend it on something that's worthy and something that matters and something that makes a difference. And I'm convinced of a couple things. One is this, that the God of the universe is inviting me, and he's inviting you, and he's inviting us as a church to something more. He's inviting us to be a part of this incredible thing that he's doing to make all things new and set all things right and draw all people to himself, which is pretty cool because he doesn't need us. He doesn't need us to do any of that, but he invites us to be a part of it anyway and gives us that incredible purpose. And I just think to be generous is to orient your life around the excitement of being used by God to make a difference. But if we're going to do that, we have to understand that our elementary school teachers were liars. Okay, this is true. I want you to picture your elementary school teachers. Now picture a stamp that says filthy liar on their face, because they told us that the meaning of life was different than the meaning of life is. You ready for a bombshell? The hokey pokey is not really what it's all about. Okay? It's not. It's a lot of fun, but it's not what it's all about. Being used by God to rewrite the future of the world is what it's all about. I don't want to talk specifically this morning about how we can use our time and our love to do that. But the second thing I'm convinced of before we get there is this. Our level of generosity is a direct reflection of how we see God and how we understand the good news of the gospel. Let me explain. If you have a Bible with you this morning, you can open it up to the book of Acts. It's the fifth book of the New Testament, sandwiched right between John and Romans. If you don't have a Bible with you, the words will be on the screen. If you don't own one, please take one from the Next Steps table on your way out. It's our gift to you. But we're going to look at one single verse in Acts chapter 20 this morning. It's the theme verse for this series. We're going to keep coming back to it. And it may be the most popular and well-known verse about giving in the entire Bible. All of us have heard it. Even if this is the first time you've ever walked in the door of a church, you've heard it, or you haven't been back to a church in a long time, you've heard it. Most of us have said it, and maybe when we said it, we didn't realize it was from the New Testament, and Jesus was the one who said it originally. And our culture, by and large, has adopted this statement as a pithy little colloquialism that's been completely stripped of its meaning. It's so cliche that it doesn't mean almost anything anymore, let alone what Jesus intended for it to mean. And here's the context of this verse. Acts tells us the story of the early church. After Jesus had died and risen again and ascended to heaven, like what it looked like in the early church. And Acts 20 tells us about Paul leaving the city of Ephesus. He'd come there over 2 years earlier, and he planted a church, and he reached a whole bunch of people for Jesus. And for over 2 years, he'd been there ministering and leading this church, and he was leaving, and he's headed to Jerusalem, where he was going to get arrested. And all the people at this church who'd known him and loved him for years know that if he goes to Jerusalem and gets arrested, they will never see him again. So they're pleading with him not to go. Please don't go. Please stay. Please don't do this. But God told him to go. And so he's going, and it's this heart-wrenching, emotional moment where Paul is saying goodbye. He's looking at these people saying, I love you. God said to go. I got to go. I will not see you again on this side, but I'll see you on the other. And as he closes this goodbye, in the middle of this intense moment, he starts talking to them about the generous life he lived because he modeled himself after Jesus. And he reminds them of something Jesus said, and this is literally his last charge, his final teaching, his concluding thought to this group of people that he has known and loved for years, the last words he says to them on this earth. He says, in everything I did, I showed you that by this kind of hard work we must help the weak. Remembering the words the Lord Jesus himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. I told you you'd heard it and said it. It's more blessed to give than to receive. But here's the thing. Most of the time when we say that, we use it incorrectly. 99% of the time when we say it's more blessed to give than to receive, it's right after we gave something and it made us feel warm and fuzzy inside. We use it to talk about a moment. But that's not what Jesus is talking about, or Paul. They're talking about a lifestyle. And also, let's just be honest with each other. If you're anything like me, especially when you're a kid, okay, you had a point in time where you gave somebody something, probably because it was their birthday or it was Christmas and your parents made you, and you gave them this gift, and some adult came and patted you on the head and said, it's more blessed to give than to receive. And you thought, it's pretty blessed to receive. Like, I don't know, maybe they're both good, but I'm not sure I'd pick the giving over the receiving, if I'm being completely honest. And the reason we do that is that we see this phrase and these words as transactional. Like a zero-sum game, there's one giver and there's one receiver, and you can only be one or the other, and if we're being honest, we'd rather be the receiver than the giver. And this saying for our society has become about a moment in time where there's a transaction. But that isn't remotely what Jesus meant when he said it's more blessed to give than to receive. See, the word blessed here is this Greek word makarios, which is kind of fun to say. Let's all say makarios together, just for fun. You ready? Makarios. I told you it was fun. Okay, this is the same word that we translate blessed, like in the Beatitudes, when Jesus says, hey, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek and the merciful. And blessed might be the best single English cognate word that we can do, but makarios doesn't really mean blessed. It's a little bit deeper and more nuanced than that, especially in our like hashtag culture where we use the word blessed to describe anything. Like every little thing. Later, someone's going to take like an Instagram picture and be like, oh, got the new chicken crisper quesadilla at Taco Bell. Blessed. It's not that. That's not what Jesus means when he says it's blessed to give. It means incredibly happy or exceedingly joyful because of what God has given. It's literally this concept of joy made large by God. Joy made large by God. And that's why we use the word blessed in the Bible, because if you're reading through and it said, Jesus said, joy made large by God are the meek, it wouldn't make any sense. Okay? So we use blessed, but it's this idea of joy made large. And Jesus is saying that kind of incredible joy, that kind of happiness and meaning and purpose made large by God is what happens when we live a lifestyle of self-sacrifice for the sake of the people around us. It's what happens when we orient our lives around the excitement of being used by God to make a difference. You can't get that from just a transactional moment. It's the outcome, it's the byproduct of a generous life. I think it's incredible because it's so countercultural and so counterintuitive. Like for us, at least for me, and I'm guessing for most of you, when we hear the word blessed, that's not really what we think of. When we picture what blessings look like, that's not the picture we have, because we think of blessing as getting more. But God repeatedly describes it as giving more. Which I think at some point begs the question, what if by some crazy circumstance God actually is right and he knows what he's talking about? I only say that half tongue-in-cheek because I don't always live like God knows what he's talking about. But what if living sacrificially like Jesus is blessed? Because it liberates us from the prisons of selfishness and materialism and vanity that we've locked ourselves in. In John 13, there's a story. It's familiar to many of us, especially churchy people. If you've been around church all your life, you know this. Jesus and his disciples are all gathered to share the Passover meal together. And it's the last time they're going to do that before Jesus gets arrested and crucified. And so we know it as the Last Supper. And there's something incredibly profound that happened right at the beginning of it that had a whole lot to do with what happened in the days and weeks and months leading up to it. See, what we read is that during this period of time, Jesus' disciples have been jockeying for position. And they're trying to find out like the rankings. Like, where do I fit in? Who's the greatest and who's the least? And where am I on the list? And how can I get to the top? And it had created a whole lot of tension in Jesus' little disciple group. Like, they're having conversations about it. Like, oh, hey Thaddeus, do you remember that super secret meeting with Jesus at the top of the mountain? It was like me and Jesus and Elijah and Moses and God the Father. No biggie. Oh, you don't remember that? You weren't there. And he's like, yeah, Peter. I wasn't there because Jesus trusted that if I stayed at the bottom of the mountain, I wouldn't do anything stupid. He only took you because you're an idiot and he wanted to keep an eye on you. And you're an idiot who ruined that meeting by opening your mouth, if I'm not incorrect. Whatever, I was there. It got so intense that at one point, two of these guys brought in their mommy to ask Jesus if they could be ranked at the top. Like, she actually had that conversation with him. These were not superhumans. They were people like us, and they were concerned with being the greatest. And this moment happens. It's a warm Jerusalem night, and they sit down together to remember their nation's history and celebrate this holy Passover meal. And most of the time doing that, they'd be guests in someone else's house. And the lowest person on the social ladder, a servant or a kid, would be tasked with washing all of their feet before the meal, because nothing can make food taste worse than the smell of stinky feet during it, right? So that always happened, every meal. Except tonight, they're in a donated space. It's just them. There's no servant. There's no kid. There's nobody who's low on the societal ladder. It's just them. So they're sitting around. They're looking at each other. Eating with dirty feet is not an option. Their mothers taught them better than that, and it would be disrespectful to the Passover celebration. Somebody's washing feet tonight, but who's it going to be? They're staring at each other, wondering, who's the least, who's the least, who's the lowest, who's washing feet? Because we can't start until somebody washes the feet, but it's not going to be me. Like, well, what about Peter? Peter's the dumbest. But Peter's like, yeah, right, it's not me. I'm in the inner circle. I made it to the top of the mountain. It's not going to be me. They're thinking, well, maybe we can make Jamesy and Johnny do it, but their mom would come in and pitch a fit again. So she's not worth dealing with. They can't do it. What about Simon the Zealot? No, the Zealots were like this crazy group who wanted to like fight Rome and do a military overthrow. So they're looking at Simon like, no, he's got knives. He's concealed carry. We're not going to try and make him do it. Not Simon. What about Bartholomew? Who even is Bartholomew? He didn't write a book of the Bible. Get to washing the feet, Bart. And they're sitting there, and they're staring at each other, wondering who's the least. Somebody's got to do this. Who's it going to be? I hope it's not me. I hope it's not me. And they're trying to prop themselves up and massage their egos at the expense of everyone else around them. And what happens? We know what happens. John writes, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing, and he wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. And he came to Simon Peter and said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. He knew it wasn't right. He knew it wasn't appropriate. And Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and head as well. And Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you, for he knew who was going to betray him. And that was why he said not everyone was clean. And when he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I've done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, like unquestionably the greatest by a wide margin. You can debate about who's better among you, but I'm the greatest by a large margin, and I just did the task of the least. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I've done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Understand, this is the most shocking, surreal moment of these 12 guys' lives. Because Jesus, again, has turned their concept of what greatness really looks like completely upside down by showing them that greatness is about sacrifice. And the crazy thing is this night, like the washing of the feet and the breaking of the bread and the sharing of the cup is only a picture of what he's about to do next. It's a picture of the selfless, sacrificial gift that he's about to give for the sake of the people who are right in front of him and their desperate need. That kind of sacrifice defined Jesus' life, and it defines the character of God. I was thinking this week about what it would look like to try and sum the Bible up in one sentence. If you need a subject, a verb, and an object, I think if you had to sum the Bible up in one sentence, God is the subject, it's about him, and the object is humanity. But what is the verb? My guess is that most of our gut reaction would be to say love. That's my gut reaction. But as I thought more and more about it, I decided that the verb is probably give. God so loved that he gave. He gave life to every single one of us, and then he gave his life to rescue the lives he'd given us. He gave. Because the kind of love that God has, that kind of love is not stationary and it isn't passive. It inspires action, and that action is always sacrificial. It requires giving. I love the way Jesus closes his thoughts. He says, now that you know these things, you will be blessed. That's not the whole verse. I was just thirsty. There's a preposition at the end of it. He actually says, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. It's the doing that makes the difference. One of my favorite authors is a guy named Bob Goff. His life motto is love God, love people, do stuff. It's awesome. And there are three things Jesus did as he washed his disciples' feet that I think can inform how we can live like him in the world and how we can find blessing in being generously self-sacrificial with our time and with our love. This is how we do stuff. First, Jesus stood. Make no mistake, there's a time to sit and learn. There's a time to be filled up, and that matters. It's good for our souls. And studying what the Bible says is important. It makes a difference in our lives to take time and study what it says, but the goal is not knowing these things. That's not the end in and of itself. It's useless to us to be filled up if we're never poured out. We know these things so that we can do these things. There's time to sit at the table. But a lifestyle of generosity means seizing the moment when it's time to stand. Jesus didn't look at the church and command us to fill our seats with people. He commanded us to fill our world with disciples. There comes a moment where it's time to stand. So Jesus stood, and then Jesus stooped. He humbled himself, and he stooped to a task that was absolutely beneath him. In every imaginable way, it was beneath him. The creator of the universe bent down, and he washed the dirty feet of sinful men, and then he gave his life for those same men, and for you and for me. He came down to earth, and he knelt to meet the need right where the need was. And I wonder if we're willing to do the same. I think if we really understand what Jesus did for us, how could we not do the same? But I look at my own life and I wonder, do we really have eyes to see and ears to hear the need that's around us? And do we really have hearts that believe that if no task on this planet is too low for our Savior, then there is no task on this planet too low for us, too small, too insignificant, or too grimy for us? It's harder to stoop than it is to stand. It's a little bit easier to get up and get going than it is to bend down and get dirty. To go to the places where no one else will go and do the stuff that nobody else will do. And if we're honest, as Americans, sometimes we'd rather give our money and send somebody else because it's dangerous and it's inconvenient. Sometimes it's more comfortable to give money than it is to give our lives and give our time and roll up our sleeves. It just is. Like if I told you, if I stood up here and told you there's someone in this church who has a deep need, they have nobody else to help them out, they got a financial need, and they need a little bit of grace to pull themselves up out of it, there are a whole lot of you who wouldn't hesitate to drop $20 in a bucket in the back if I left one there. But if I gave you that same story, that there's someone in this church who has a deep need, they don't have anyone else, and they need a few people to come help them move for a few hours next Saturday, history suggests to me we'd have a whole lot less participation. We just would. But stooping means meeting the needs there actually are and not the needs we wish there were. Stooping takes sacrifice. It takes a real humility. Jesus knelt down to meet the need right where the need was, and then he served. He served. He showed up and he served. He gave what he had for the need that was right in front of him for the sake of the people around him. When I was 8, one Sunday I filled out my own connection card at church, and I checked a box that said, I'd like to serve. And so my pastor actually met me. He took me to Wendy's, and he met with me, and we talked about it. He said, hey, Mike, I see some real leadership gifts in you. I gotta serve for you. I want you to come early on Sundays and put connection cards in the back of all the seats, which wasn't exactly the job I thought I was signing up for. I wanted to do something big, and he just told me that he saw some leadership gifts in me, but I was 8, and I wasn't a leader, and that wasn't a very leaderly task, but it's the one he gave me. And so for 2 years, until we moved, my dad took me to church, and I got the connection cards, and I stuffed them in the back of the seats, and he never helped me, not once. He just got coffee and sat there and watched me work. If he tells you differently, he's a liar, okay? And the only people for those 2 years that knew that I was even doing this were the pastor, the secretary who printed the cards, and my parents. Like no one knew and no one cared. It was my first ministry opportunity. And at the time, I wasn't super fired up. I didn't think I was making a difference, and I wasn't very excited about this job. But as I look back now, I'm so deeply grateful for the fact that my pastor understood I needed to learn a lesson that I didn't know I needed to learn. And my dad, in sitting there and letting me do the work, understood that I needed to learn a lesson that I didn't know I needed to learn. That serving is about meeting the need that's right in front of you, whatever it is. And that if I couldn't be faithful in doing what was unseen and unappreciated and insignificant, I would probably never be faithful in doing something else. That if I wasn't willing to do a job nobody else wanted, I wasn't fit to do a job that anyone else did. And that if I couldn't serve like Jesus, I could never even try to lead like Jesus. Because the life of Jesus tells us that servant leadership is the only kind. And that the path to greatness leads straight to the bottom. Jesus stood and stooped and served. And he looked at his disciples and said, man, when you guys get it, when you get it that this is who I am, and this is what I'm about, and this is what I created you for, I knit you and wired you together for this at the beginning of the world. When you get it that this is what it's all about, you're going to unleash your full potential on the world, and you're going to unlock joy and blessing that's overflowing in your lives. You guys, this is what I want for you, not from you. It's what I want for you. I think sometimes we think about generosity with our lives and our time, and we think it's something God wants from us, but I want to remind us this morning that God invites us to generosity for our sake, not his. It's not something he needs. It's something we do. And my prayer is that we'll be a church who just chases that vision with reckless abandon. That people will look at Revision and be like, they're crazy. I don't know, they give like crazy, they serve like crazy, they're fired up about something, I don't know what it is, but they're a little bit crazy. That's the goal. That's why we do Reach Des Moines. If this is your first Sunday and you have no idea what that means, or you've been here for a couple months and you're not quite sure what I'm talking about, every time there's 5 Sundays in a month, we cancel our services on the 5th Sunday. And we spread out around the metro to serve the city of Des Moines. We partner with organizations that are doing amazing things to help people in need, and we just do the best that we can to help them move the ball down the field in their particular area just a little bit. Because some of our core values are that gifted people give to people and saved people live like the Savior. And so we stand, stoop, and serve because we're all in on the idea that the good news of Jesus brings flourishing to people and that it has to be lived out with our hands and our feet. And we're doing it next week. Next week is the 5th Sunday in October. And so I want to challenge everyone in the room this morning to be a part of it. I know that there are excuses and objections in your head. I know all the reasons that you might not want to do it. And I know some of the serves aren't very cool. They're not going to make a very great, awesome Instagram selfie later, like serve today, okay? But there's blessing in giving. And we're created in the image of God to be like him, to have a lifestyle oriented around the excitement of being used by God to make a difference for the sake of others. So sign up today at the Next Steps table. Show up next week at 9, and let's do the things we know. Let's serve because our world is dying. It's dying for a church that lives and looks like Jesus. It's what we're made for, and that's my challenge. Be here next week for Reach Des Moines. And look, I know, we're well aware that serving a few times a year isn't going to solve all the problems in this city. That even our house groups serving regularly isn't going to solve all the problems in this city. We've been told by multiple people that serving like this, that even doing Reach Des Moines is a terrible idea and it's not sustainable because we're giving a bunch of money rather than receiving an offering. We're sold out as a community for the idea that people in need and people in bondage of any kind desperately need to encounter the hope and the love of Jesus. And that we exist to bring it in every way we can, everywhere we can. This is us. And if we fail at it, at least we're going to fail spectacularly at something that matters. But I think as we do this, if we do it, as we cultivate a life of generosity in response to the outrageous generosity God's given us, Jesus is going to do great things. He's going to give us joy made large by God, and he's going to use us to rewrite eternity for the people around us, 1 inch at a time, 1 life at a time. Will you guys pray with me? Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for giving us purpose. Thank you for using us to make a difference in the world. Thank you for your incredible generosity to us. Lord, help us remember those things. Help us remember just what it means that you, as the God of the universe, gave up everything, just emptied yourself for us. Lord, as we pursue purpose and meaning and greatness, help us do it like Jesus. Thank you for the way you did that for us. Amen.